Hello and welcome to episode 121 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we got Black Ops 6 confirmed, the release date, everything that has been announced. We know when the reveal will be, and we'll talk about some of the details and features that we've learned over the past week. And we also have some pretty big upsets, some surprises in the CDL this past week in week 2 of the Major 4 qualifiers. And we also have some GA drama, which is, we haven't had it in a while, but it's back, just making its appearance late in the season. But before we get to any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
I'm doing all right, like you said. Got some good stuff to talk about. Always excited to talk about a Treyarch COD, even though it feels like it's been a while. So yeah, and had some juicy matches this weekend. So ready to hop right in.
So Black Ops 6, we'll start with that before we get into the CDO stuff. We had talked about it on last episode or 2 episodes ago about how Black Ops 6 had been announced, that was the confirmed next Call of Duty title. But we've learned more about it over the past week, including the size of the download, which has caused a lot of consternation among COD fans, and also some of the prestige stuff. So the old school prestige is coming back. Zombies, the round-based stuff, which I'm sure you're very excited about. A lot of what I saw was related to the omnidirectional movement, which I think people are comparing to Gears of War. And then we have at least 12 6v6 maps, 16 multiplayer maps coming at launch. And we will know more about it with the reveal in August. So what bit really jumped out to you and you want to start off with?
Yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head there with the round-based zombie stuff being what I'm probably most excited about. Um, I haven't really played Modern Warfare Zombies MWZ in a couple months now. It was alright at the start, but I just, I'm probably too much of an old head at this point to, enjoy change like that. So I'm going to be happy for the return of round-based zombies. With this game, also really excited about the return of classic prestige. Uh, Especially, I think one of the biggest. I don't think it's really like an issue, but just one of the most unnecessary changes. I think that's a better way of wording it. One of the biggest unnecessary changes over recent COD years since the implementation of the battle pass and the seasons and whatnot has been like a level cap on like you can only get to 5th prestige in the first season and like 9th prestige after that sort of thing. I just thought that was, a little ridiculous. And even at some point, there's even like when you have the preseason right after launch, you couldn't even go beyond level 55. Like you had to just wait for the season to drop before you could even quote unquote prestige. So now the return of the classic system is what I grew up playing and all that. So I'm excited about that. It is going to be interesting to see what tidbits of classic prestige is mixed with some of the newer stuff, because one of the things from like way back in the day, like OG Modern Warfare 2, World at War, COD 4 even, is when you prestige, you lost everything. You got a new emblem, went back to level 1, and you had to unlock all your guns from scratch again. Then I think in like might have been Black Ops 1. I know Black Ops 2 had it. Black Ops 1 had like the COD points, and not current COD points, but they had like the currency because they had the wager matches and stuff. But I think they might have had it too. Is like you had like prestige tokens where you could like yeah, Black Ops 1 definitely had it because I remember now. But you could like unlock one thing, and then you would prestige and you would lose everything but that thing you unlocked. So if you prestige 5 times, you would technically have 5 prestige tokens and 5 things you could unlock the carryover. And more recently, with prestiging now, you didn't lose anything. Your level kept going up, but it wasn't like resetting your level back to 1 or anything like that. So it's going to be interesting to learn more exactly what elements of all the phases of prestiging over the last 2 decades are in Black Ops 6, and when they say classic prestige returning. But I'm definitely excited for that grind to resume. I do think after that, most notably worth mentioning was this whole, I think, misconception is the best way of putting it. When I think it was the Xbox page or one of the like pre-order pages suggested it was going to be 309 gigabytes to download Black Ops 6. I immediately said in work chat and stuff like this is, there's no way it's 300 gigabytes for just Black Ops 6. It has to be for the whole COD HQ thing that encompasses multiple downloads from like MW2, Warzone, MW3, etc. And you can like choose what you have downloaded and what you uninstall nowadays. Um, so that's what Activision came out literally a couple hours ago, towards the end of my work shift today, and said like, yeah, that's the case. It's for the 300 plus gigabyte is an approximation, and that's for COD HQ, not just Black Ops 6. So I think there were a lot of people. I even had friends who were, casual COD players who texted me and were saying like, I can't believe this is, how big the download is. And I'm just like, yeah, there's just no way. And I'm glad I was right. I mean, I've been wrong before about stuff involving Call of Duty. So if it was actually 300 gigabytes for just Black Ops 6, I guess I wouldn't have been totally surprised, but I was pretty sure that wasn't going to be the case this time around. And I think a lot of people will be happy to know that's definitely not what's going on here. But still, that's not to say it's going to be a small download. It's still going to be a massive download. You're going to have to pick and choose. I know, like, I already have Warzone uninstalled on my PS5, and it's like I still am at like 200 gigabytes for the COD HQ app or whatever. So definitely going to add on to whatever systems you got, and it's not going to be a small download. So definitely something to keep in mind as we gear up for the October 25th release date of Black Ops. We do have the multiplayer reveal / COD next, whatever you want to call it, on August 28th. So that'll be our first real look at multiplayer, which, like you said too, there should be 12 6v6 maps at launch. I forget what they said. It was like 4 bigger maps, probably like Ground War or something like that. So 12 6v6 maps at launch, probably. Yeah, it's about where we've been for some of these games recently. Obviously, this year was a bit of an exception because it was just all the old MW2 maps. So, yeah, and I guess to round it out, kind of like you said, that the omni movement or omnidirectional movement, however you want to phrase it, that's definitely something that a lot of people, I've been seeing content like, oh, can't wait to see Shotzi break this, or can't wait to see Shotzi use this in action, all that stuff. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, but definitely going to want to see more of that before I have too much to say, because I feel like there could be parts of it that are utilized on a wider scale, but I also feel like at the end of the day there should be some, like, like I can't think of diving backwards being advantageous unless it like just completely breaks the camera or something like that. So there's some aspects of it I'm not totally sure on how they'll work, and others can definitely have an impact on way gunfights go down and stuff. So interesting to learn more about that as the weeks and months go on here.
And I wonder if it's a feature that can be turned off in settings, because it doesn't feel like necessarily something that would need to happen, kind of like almost peaking, where there have been a few different features throughout the years that Call of Duty has tried to figure out, leaning and whatnot. And a lot of times those have been able to be disabled in the game settings, which, competitive, a lot of times they do disable them. But yeah, I think just from the little bit that they've shown, and obviously it has not been an extensive, we haven't really been able to see a ton. I do think that there's a good chance that it's going to break some cameras, and it's going to really mess with people, especially in the beginning of the game. But it would also create a bigger skill gap if it is something that can be used and almost abused by players. Like someone like Shotzi, if he's able to really, like, if it actually is a very game-breaking mechanic, then he could become even better, and other players can become even better, which, people always say they want a wider skill gap. I don't think movement is actually what people want in their skill gap, or how they want the skill gap to be widened, but we'll see what happens with that. But yeah, I thought, some of the things that they talked about were interesting. I definitely agree with you there on the prestige aspect of it, because obviously, like, people play a lot, or I would say the majority of people that play Call of Duty play in the first, whatever week or so of launch, and for them not to be able to progress past a certain point due to like, oh, it's a preseason season 0, whatever. I think that was really stupid, and it definitely turned me off. I'm like, well, I don't need to play anymore because I can't go any further in this. And there's no point, you're not getting anything out of it other than just playing. And hopefully that's something that'll be addressed. And who knows how they'll kind of mix the prestiges, because they never truly take the classic stuff and like just port it over to now. There's always something different, always kind of
Exactly.
like a tweak that they are, even with the maps, like, MW3 is all old MW maps, but at the end of the day, like they're slightly different. There are things,
There's doors.
yeah, exactly, which is a big change. Or the game modes, they weren't designed for these.
Yeah.
So it's something that Call of Duty tries all the time about, bringing back something that they've already taken away, which is a very Activision thing. It's one of the most infuriating things that they do year after year after year. But I'm sure that'll be another case with the prestiges.
I'm gonna say, I mean, that, at this point, it seems like their most successful achievements in recent years have been stuff you didn't think would need to be removed, being removed and then brought back, like the red dots on the mini map. Like they bring it back and people celebrate like it's like the greatest thing since sliced bread, when you really had that a decade plus ago. Now with Prestige, people are really excited about it being back when it didn't ever need to really be changed. Some people can make the argument about like the unlocked tokens and what improving it. I would probably side with that as opposed to like completely wiping you to level 1, but potato at that point. Like it's just, that seems like the big thing recently is they take stuff away and then it's returned and celebrated, which you make the argument like did it ever really need to be changed in the first place.
Yeah, I mean that's just something that they've kind of mastered it at this point.
Yeah.
It's just, I think it's a part of the appeal of their games that even like MW3, that's why I had a really hard time buying into all of the hype of people like, this game is so good. It's like, well, yeah, in comparison to MW2, because that was a steaming pile of crap, and they literally just took all of the negative feedback that they got for a year from MW2 and were like, let's try to do the exact opposite with MW3, and we don't have to actually create like from scratch a bunch of these maps. We have bases from old games that we can take and put it in. That's why I was a little hesitant to give them a ton of praise, because it really felt like they just had a year of beta with MW2 for MW3, and that kind of turned me off a little bit on that. But that's just Activision, so you just got to get used to it.
And I will say that, I feel like if I could go back to last year in the podcast, even the previous years, I was very vocal and about not being as excited for the upcoming releases with MW2 and MW3 in particular. I can remember talking about that, and I'm pretty sure I've said this next point too. But I will say, for starters, that I this is probably the most excited for Call of Duty I've been in several years at this point, and it's a lot of it has to do with the round-based zombies coming back. I'm just really excited about that on a personal level, not even like comp-wise. But what I feel like I've said before, and I think definitely rings true after all this initial stuff, is this is the constant cycle of the early releases, people getting bored of the current COD game, excited for just a taste of what's coming, and people getting overhyped about it. But with the amount of time Treyarch has had to make and develop this COD and potentially perfect it, I think there was reports of like they've been playtesting for 2 years and whatnot. This is make or break for Call of Duty. This Treyarch game has to be really good in order to I feel like keep a lot of players around, and that's gonna be so. I've lost a lot of faith in Call of Duty over recent years, but I have not lost faith in Treyarch's ability as the go-to developer. So I'm personally giving them this chance here to really keep me around. If this is a disappointment, I'm gonna I don't know where I'm gonna go. Maybe take my talents to X Defiant more.
Yeah, I had like a little bit of a mini tangent building into my brain, because it feels like a missed opportunity because, all right, we're announcing all the stuff about Call of Duty Black Ops 6, right? Like right about now. Why couldn't this wait another month, or why couldn't the CDL be pushed up another month? And then during Champs weekend, that's when we, kind of like almost like the NBA All-Star weekend where they do so much stuff that weekend. Of course, like the game itself is kind of a joke, but like that weekend is a really big weekend for the league in general. Why can't Call of Duty embrace that Champs weekend? Like, well, we're gonna announce, before Champs Grand Finals, we're going to reveal, the next Call of Duty game, or we're going to do a teaser, and then let's get, hundreds of thousands of people tuning in to whatever the Champs Grand Final is, and hopefully that'll boost viewership and that'll create some esports fans. I just feel like it might be, I obviously understand why you don't want to wait too long to start marketing the game and start, getting people excited about it. But it feels like really just a missed opportunity that we can't incorporate the competitive scene into this, or vice versa. We can't, cross that.
I will say I think the obvious answer for this year in particular is this is the first year Microsoft has really had the opportunity to do this since the Activision acquisition. So having this initial reveal be a part of the Xbox showcase or whatever at Summer Game Fest, like that just makes too much sense. And the amount of money that Microsoft invested in Activision and Call of Duty to acquire it, there's just no way they're gonna like miss out on a chance to do that. I will say though, like maybe like the COD Next aspect or the multiplayer aspect that could be incorporated in with the CDL. That's also another something we've talked about numerous times on this podcast, is Call of Duty in particular, how you get those casual fans to the CDL and introduce them to the competitive aspect and stuff, especially with GAs and you can't use every gun, yada yada, all that. We talked about that enough at this point, but something as simple as that, as doing like a multiplayer reveal or tying it into the CDL somehow in some fashion during the biggest moments of the CDL too, like you suggested, is definitely something that I feel like if the CDL sticking around and Activision decides to take it seriously, or Microsoft, sorry, that is something they can do. But I think, as long as they're doing like their Xbox showcases, that probably the initial reveal of the COD game can be there. But maybe, you sneak the multiplayer into CDL, give the CDL some crumbs of attention there and whatnot where you can, and maybe it'll, help foster some growth there.
Yeah, I just think, especially with Champs, for Champs Sunday especially, you could do Challengers Finals on the main stage, and then in between Challengers Finals and the beginning of the Grand Finals for Champs, you do some kind of Call of Duty thing. Like I think, like you mentioned, it's unrealistic probably to do the reveal, but to do some kind of multiplayer sneak peek or explain certain aspects of what's coming up in this next game. I'm sure there are developers or somebody could fly out to wherever Champs is. Usually it's in LA, so they would just drive to Champs to make sure. But like they can just talk to people. They can maybe have, free tests of the game, for some of the streamers that go to Champs or whatnot. It just feels like we need to have some kind of crossover, and maybe that will be the case moving forward because the acquisition of Microsoft, or of Activision by Microsoft, that is relatively new. The CDL, as we talked about earlier this season, there seems to be kind of a like reaffirmation that we're going to keep trying with this, at least for, the next few years with the revenue guarantee and all that. So hopefully that will be the case over the next few years. And my pipe dream is to offset, the Call of Duty esports season and the Halo esports season, at least to a certain extent. So we can see more crossover, and hopefully players can do both, or hopefully just maybe formal, because that would be a pretty cool thing. But that's more of a pipe dream. But I think, like you said, there is reason to be excited for just Treyarch in general. I don't think Call of Duty has earned that, but Treyarch, to a certain extent, has earned that kind of faith. But they got to deliver, right? So we'll see what happens on August 28th. That's the COD Next, the multiplayer reveal. We'll definitely learn a lot more about the game at that point. So we got about 2.5 months, which that'll be like right in the middle of the off season. So we'll have at least a little bit to talk about at that point. Anything else on Black Ops 6 before we move on?
I think we hit everything. Obviously, we don't know a ton yet, but I feel like those are the main talking points. So, any of our listeners on YouTube or whatever, you guys got any thoughts on what we know about Black Ops 6 so far? Leave it in the comments, and maybe we'll talk about a couple next episode.
So let's talk about the CDL now. Another week of qualifying matches. I believe we had 10 matches this week. An interesting week for sure. So Friday was, interesting in a way, but it was the least interesting of these days, simply because we had a few upsets on Saturday and Sunday. But on Friday, June 7th, we start off with Seattle versus New York. New York ends up winning 3-1. I think we both said that it was going to be an interesting series simply because Seattle had seemed to show some kind of potential recently, and New York has never, they're not super strong at the moment, or really all season. They haven't shown that kind of strength that we would really expect of them, but they end up winning this 3-1. What did you think of the Subliners win?
Yeah, I think that was really our thought process coming into this week of qualifiers for New York in particular, was they had two tough matchups, not necessarily against top teams, but kind of those teams right below the top. And, based on the way New York has played recently and in recent months collectively, just kind of been up and down a little bit. These were going to be a true test of where New York is at, and especially with the way Seattle had been playing. Seattle comes out, wins that map one. I'm thinking in the back of my head, like, oh, this is the exact scenario we were talking about last week, right? Like, this is Seattle's going to pull out the upset here. We're going to be talking about what's wrong with New York on the pod, but then after that, New York takes care of business and wins the next three. The second hard point, map 4 Rio, was actually the closest map of the whole series. 250, 238 kind of came, did come down to the wire, but I think it came down to just a scrappy battle on one of those final hills that was super intense. So that was a good moment, but is worth mentioning too with Seattle, as we've kind of talked about them a little bit more recently in terms of them improving and whatnot. I believe the broadcast mentioned that they are now 5-0 on Vista Hardpoint, which was the first map in the series and the only map that Seattle won in the series. So that is something I'm going to have my eye on going forward. Are other teams going to start vetoing that against Seattle? Has that been a factor in Seattle's rise up up the standings a little bit? Have they just been able to sneak in that Vista and teams haven't really been thinking about it? Or is this something now they're going to be like, okay, they're 5-0 on it, we got to veto this? Does that open up their map pool more and get something else in? I don't really know, but that's going to be something to keep an eye on with Seattle in particular for me.
Next match, Minnesota versus Miami. Like you said, you were saying about New York. If they had lost, you were thinking, okay, like what's wrong with New York? We maybe having that conversation. That was the thought process after this game. This for Minnesota, for me at least. I was like, I don't know what the hell this team is. Obviously, Miami is. They've looked a lot better since the last week or two of the Major 3 qualifiers. They end up going to Major 3. They win 2 matches, their first 2 matches on LAN. And then Vickle goes out. He misses that first match of the Major 4 qualifiers against OpTic. He comes back for this one, so that's very good. And they end up beating Minnesota 3-1. It's not like it's a huge upset or anything. It's certainly not. But at this point, and we'll talk more about Minnesota later in the show, but at this point, I was like, all right, like, what is this team? Like, what is this? What is the point right now? They look so hopeless. I think they had beaten Boston last week, but like everybody beats Boston, so it's not really a big deal. What did you think of this? Obviously, you picked Miami to win, but we didn't even know if Vickle was even going to play at that point.
Yeah, I really wasn't thrilled to pick either team in this matchup, especially without knowing the status of Vickel for this one. But it's definitely, in at this point, it made sense for me that Miami would take the win. Minnesota takes the 6-5 win in the search, which we'll talk about more later in the episode. But that was one where Minnesota could have won. Map one, Miami makes a strong comeback, and then Minnesota should have took map two much more convincingly. I don't remember the round comeback, but Miami forced a bit of a comeback, and Miami clutched up in the round 11. But could have been a whole different scenario if Miami wins both those first two maps, or if they lose both two, different outcome in the series. But uh, at end of the day, this was a weird one, kind of like one of those matches at this point now, towards the end of the season, where you're playing who's put in front of you, trying to just get points where you can to hopefully make champs, and Miami was able to capitalize on the matchup here.
And we can keep on moving because this was a very interesting match, even though the result ended up being what we expected. At least the winner, Atlanta wins 3-2 against the Carolina Royal Ravens. So we both expected Atlanta to win. That they're the top seed in the CDL this season. They are, one of the favorites to win champs at this moment. One of the favorites to win Major Four. Carolina looked like a contender against Atlanta FaZe. I'm not exactly sure what to make of this because Carolina has, they beat New York. They had I think another close game against New York. They at times look a lot more competitive than their record, especially would seem to indicate. And this is another case of that. They win the first two maps of this series. Granted, they were very, very tight, but they win round 11 Invasion Search, which, again, FaZe struggles on Invasion Search. And they lose. FaZe loses that, go to Invasion Control. Carolina has the chance to sweep. They have to win one of the next three maps to upset FaZe, and they're unable to do so. Your thoughts on this? Obviously, S&D wins championships, and they split the S&Ds here with FaZe.
I think the biggest thing here is that it has become increasingly apparent that these top contenders, notably Atlanta, Toronto, and OpTic, are being very open about testing their map set ahead of
Yeah.
champs and Major Four. They know they're in. Obviously they want to make sure they get the winners bracket for Major Four, but even in a world where they somehow didn't, they are still going to be there at champs at the end of the day. So Atlanta had a tweet before this match. It was like, yeah, you read that map set correctly. Being very well, they have I don't remember what the record is, but it's not a great record on sub base hard point. Looks like they're actually going to win it at one point, but then, um, Carolina makes the comeback there. There was a delay during map two. That was during the workday, so I didn't have it audio on. I wasn't entirely sure what the situation was, but something was going on there. But like you said, they've had their struggles with Invasion Search this year, so another map that they're seemingly trying to improve at ahead of Major Foreign Champs. And then it's like, okay, after that, it's almost like they're like, okay, we played those two maps, that was all fun. Now we're just gonna come out and win 3-0 after those first two maps didn't mean anything, right? So, um, definitely a bold strategy, especially when you're trying to get that top seed for Major Four. You want to you know you have some wiggle room, but I don't know. And end of the day, it pays off. They're able to get the overall series win, and for Carolina, it's just tough at that point. 0-3 in these Major Four qualifiers with 3 Game 5 losses. We've talked about it before that obviously a loss is a loss, but a 3-2 loss is better than a 3-0 loss for a multitude of reasons. And in this scenario where, the CDL points are so close, the map wins could be a tiebreaker for getting winner's bracket at Major 4, which could be a tiebreaker for that 8th spot at Champs. Like the margin for error is very slim for Carolina, and obviously you would like to see some of these 3-2 losses turn into 3-2 wins or 3 whatever wins. But at the end of the day, if you're gonna lose these matches, the 3-2 is the best possible losing outcome. So, yeah, not great for Carolina, but could be worse, I guess.
Yeah, so FaZe was 1-5 on sub base hardpoint entering this weekend, and they played that map game 1 of both of their series. So, like you said, they're obviously experimenting, trying to improve. This is better than practice, really, trying to get as many reps as they can. And with Invasion Search, they have like a good overall record, like over 500, and it's actually their most played search and destroy map this season. But at the same time, recently that has become a major issue. I think they had lost, 2 in the last qualifiers, and then I think they lost on Invasion Search 2 more times at the major. So that's 4 of their 6 or 7 losses right there on that map. So it obviously has become more of an issue recently. Why? I have absolutely no idea why that map in particular has become an issue, but it seems like they're really trying to rectify it. And it didn't work out necessarily in this series, but they're still able to get the win, which is just such a FaZe thing to lose some of these maps, trying out, like they've done this for years, where they're definitely trying out different maps and different vetoes, and they still end up winning these matches. So they keep their number 1 seed, and as we'll talk about a little bit later, they actually got a bigger lead on number 2 because of what OpTic did. But Saturday, June 8th, we started off with Boston, Seattle. Boston got swept. The Surge are back in the win column, and now the Boston Breach have tied the Paris Legion for the longest losing streak in CDL history. They have lost 13 straight. I've said it before. It's better to be embarrassing bad, to be horrific, like historically bad, than just to be mediocre. And that is what the Boston Breach have brought to us. I never thought that we would see a team outdo the Paris Legion, because that team was horrendous. But the Boston Breach are approaching that. They have now lost 13 in a row. They've lost like half of those by 3-2s, which is really sad if you think about it, like how close they've been to really like a winning record over this losing streak. And it's just not worked out. And it seems like it's gotten worse over the past few weeks. It definitely feels like they have maybe lost hope, or they obviously have made a few roster changes, and it just seems like it's gone from bad to worse for them. Any thoughts on this Seattle 3-0?
Nah, I think, at this point we've kind of talked probably more about Boston than we needed to recently, but I will say, end of the day, they didn't get 3-2 beat this time. It was, quick, easy 3-0. So might not be a positive, but it might be a little less painful for Boston fans that, they didn't really have that chance at victory as the same as a 3-2. So at this point, I'm really, I looked ahead to the schedule. They have some winnable matches, but
not in that first one.
I'm just I'm kind of wondering, is this going to be a case of we don't see Boston win any matches in the Major 3 or Major 4 cycles? And I know one person in particular, Austin Liticote, who would be incredibly happy if Boston doesn't win a single match after dropping him. Yep. That would be a spicy tweet incoming if that happens, I feel like.
I mean, I forget what the exact situation was, but just to jump ahead a little bit, Boston plays Atlanta in their first match of this week. So, like, the odds are definitely stacked against them that they're not going to end up being that number 1 all-time losing streak team. But FaZe, they lost to LAG, I think, online, so
Yeah.
that they have a letdown here and there, and maybe that'll be this. I have no idea, but the next match, speaking of letdowns, the New York Subliners, they do what they do. They are a good team. They are not a great team, and the Vegas Legion are winning champs. We're back after it feels like a year, but it's really been like a month and a half, 2 months. Vegas actually looks like they have life again. They beat the New York Subliners 3-0. They sweep them. It was decently close, but certainly not like you know it was not a super tight 3-0. It seemed like Vegas actually earned this sweep. I know people were complaining about the servers, and I think even Attach made a comment about it because I think they played this game on the Virginia servers, and Attach was like, "We've won and lost games on this, so I don't really think that had anything to do with it." Your thoughts on this win? If it's tainted, should we put Attach in the gulag and make him pay for his sins? What should we do with him?
For starters, I mean, you can't punish a guy like a Thatch. I believe I was watching Takrab's video or something on that, and like even Takrab wasn't sure where Geo and Johnny are located, and um, a team like Paris/Vegas, who we've historically talked about their willingness or lack thereof to spend money on the team and facility, that sort of thing. Like that's just not a thing Vegas has done. So like players playing spread out across the country, resulting in potential strange, unusual server situations. I guess isn't the weirdest thing I've heard, but end of the day, you got to show up and you know play your matches, and that's what Vegas did here. They capitalized on another opportunity to beat a team that you probably didn't expect. I know we were kind of looking, week by week at Vegas' schedule, but they obviously had to play OpTic before this, and they get the upset there, and getting a quote unquote upset here too against New York. That's 20 points in the bank for them, and in a lot of people's eyes, 20 points that you were not expecting them to have in the potential race for champs. So yeah, the Vegas is winning champs crew has got a glimmer of hope. This has happened before. The Vegas is winning champs crew has been let down in the past too by this
Quite a
same
few.
by just they give you a sliver of hope and then they take it right away. But yeah, this is obviously it's a very important win, a solid win. New York, it's that's kind of like we were saying earlier, like I don't want to say it was expected because obviously we didn't predict it, but it's just one of those things where like at this point I'm not surprised to be talking about New York losing this match, right? Like it makes sense just based on what we've seen, the inconsistencies out of the squad throughout the year. And I guess if they want to blame online cheese and whatnot, then they can. They have every right to, especially the whole Seattle and 04 drama with Sib last time, where Seattle beats them online and then they play on LAN and New York beats them on LAN. So maybe it's a situation here where Major Four, we get to see a rematch of these two teams on LAN, and New York beats them on LAN, and then Sib's talking trash to Johnny and crew. Who knows? But yeah, this is much needed and important win for Vegas, and we'll have to see if they're able to capitalize. Because at the end of the day, like it's great that they're getting these wins against these teams you don't expect, but if they're also not capitalizing on these other more favorable matchups that aren't against like the top four teams, then it's really no different than them losing to the top four and just beating up on some of those other lower ranked teams.
It is very fitting of both of these teams to have this result. New York, defending world champions, have played they have not been bad. I think that would be a really big overstatement. They've been disappointing for sure. They've been underwhelming this season. They are in fourth right now, a very distant fourth place. Obviously, they're guaranteed to go to champs and whatnot, and they will very likely be the fourth seed heading into champs. That being said, they have been up and down all year from that major one where they just they didn't come to play pretty much. They looked horrible, and they've looked better since then. But they seem to have kind of these every qualifiers. There's always one result where you're like, how does a team that is supposed to be like a world championship caliber team lose that? That's this result for them. And that's not to disrespect Vegas, but Vegas has been not very good for the past like month or month and a half. And that comes to Vegas. It's very fitting that a team that has been so up and down that they're able to beat a team that they definitely should not. And they're also flirting with champs again, just like they did last year, where they looked like they were overperforming at times and then they would underperform right when we started to get a little bit of hope for them. It feels like it's coming again. They are right on the edge of qualifying for champs, but they're going to need some help. They're going to need to be a little more consistent and pick up a few more wins. Like you said, if they can't capitalize and beat the teams that are in the bottom 8, then it's not going to work. They're just going to end up being on the outside looking in, just like they were last year. So very fitting for both teams. They're true to form, as some people would say. But yeah, New York loses, Vegas wins. And then we had, I don't think this is like a gigantic upset or anything. It's certainly not on the level of Vegas beating New York. But the Carolina Royal Ravens, who gave FaZe everything that they had, they end up beating LAT, who we have given a lot of praise to over the past few weeks, and deservedly so. They've actually seemed like they and Seattle were really trying to distance themselves from the bottom 6. And LAT and Seattle were trying to solidify themselves as, the 5th or 6th best teams in the CDL. Well, this was a good chance for LAT to continue to solidify that, to continue to earn CDL points, and especially considering Seattle had Boston this week, try to keep pace with the Surge. That did not happen. The Royal Ravens end up splitting their matches this week. They win the second match 3-2. Back-to-back Game 5s for Carolina this week. They win this Game 5. What jumped out to you? Obviously, we've talked a lot about Carolina this season, but this is a big win, especially as we get closer to the end of the season, and every bit of CDL points matters.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me this series overall was just Gwen's performance. I think we kind of touched on it last week where it felt like in a vacuum it was potentially some of the worst statistical performances that Gwen's had in his pretty good rookie year so far. Last week online, I think I saw some stuff on the timeline about him potentially being sick and whatnot. But regardless of the circumstances and reasoning, last week he definitely played really well in this matchup, dropping a 1.35, 92, and 68 overall. That's more of what we've come to expect from him. Obviously, this is on the higher side, but strong statistical performances is what he's produced on a pretty consistent basis this year. And I think that's really the story here. Obviously, you can talk again about not knowing what's going on with Carolina. They lose the first search in the series, but then they're able to ice up with the Game 5 round 11 win. So I don't know. They do win both hard points in a Game 5. Obviously, just talking before this, I think that means all 4 of their series in these qualifiers now are Game 5s. So a lot of maps played, which I guess Carolina fans, that's something that end of the season here, you want to be getting those reps in and whatnot. So 20 maps played and 2 weeks in meaningful maps, not only like scrims and whatnot. In actual matches, whether it's online or whatnot, the important reps there for Carolina. So, yeah, this is another case here of a crucial win for Carolina. Definitely needed it after some of the losses they've had earlier in these qualifiers. And for LAT, yeah, it's one of those that probably based on the way they've been playing up to this point, you kind of expect them to win, but again, it's one of those situations we've talked about. I talked about Ghosty last week, I know, but still haven't been completely sold on LAT, and they're a team that's kind of just skated by in my eyes in terms of doing decently in the last major qualifiers, then an okay performance on land in terms of what they did earlier in the season before that, and then now they started out with a couple wins in these qualifiers before this one. So, still not really sure what to make of that team, but at this point, it's just got to be aspirations of making champs, and obviously this loss hurts them in that pursuit, but they still have a little bit of wiggle room, not necessarily a ton, but they do have uh, because of land when I believe they have 145 CDL points, and then there are a couple teams like right below them, but the 5 points could be a difference between like potentially being tied with the team or just being 5 ahead or 5 behind. So something to keep an eye on there.
Yeah, in terms of standings, this is a very important game for both of these teams, because if Carolina had lost, they would, especially since Vegas, they got their wins this week. Carolina really needed to keep pace with them at least a little bit, and get one of these wins. And now they're tied for 9th with Vegas, and only 10 points back from 8th. Whereas LAT, if they had won, they would be in 6th place, 5 points ahead of Miami. Now they're in 7th, 5 points behind Miami, and only 5 points ahead of Minnesota, like you said. So, it's a very important match and a very important result for both teams. And that's what's crazy about the way things have shaken out over the past few weeks, is that LAT and Seattle looked like at one point they might be able to keep pushing and keep ascending and create a little bit of a gap between them in like 6, 7, and 8, or excuse me, 7 and 8. But now Miami is really, they had their 2-0 week. So this is, big week for them. LAT, they lose a match that they really shouldn't have. And Seattle obviously had a really tough matchup in the first one. So, a very interesting result, but we've kind of come to expect that with LAT. Carolina has also played teams really, really well all year long. Last match of Saturday, Miami versus LAG. I mentioned it, but Miami goes 2-0 this week. They win 3-0 in this series. They sweep the Gorillas, which, the Gorillas obviously not a very good team at all. They're currently in 11th place in the CDL, but this was a very, very close series. What did you think of Miami winning this and them getting to 2-0 on the week?
Yeah, this is one of those we've talked about it this year in particular, but previously on the podcast, where it's like, yeah, you have your 3-0s where they're just absolute stomps, like DoorDash challenge or whatever they call it in the Kylie, where it's like 20-minute matches, and 100-point club, 6-0 in the search, 3-0 in the control, that sort of like absolute shutout. That wasn't the case with this 3-0 though. This is one where it's 250, 229 in the hard point, 6-5 in the search, and 3-2 in the control. So literally, barring a 250 to 249 in the hard point, it's 20 hard points away from being like as close of 3 maps as you can get. So that's at least one positive, I guess, for LAG, who well documented. We've discussed multiple times now the struggles online for them and whatnot. So not going to really need to harp on that. But yeah, solid performance out of Miami. They did, we'll get to it in a second, but it was one of the first times I believe they mentioned on the timeline or broadcast of Miami played 3 matches this week, so they got one more coming up, which is something we haven't really seen much of, but obviously because of like the scheduling changes and whatnot, seems like Miami was thrown into the mix there for that. So they didn't get to have their 2-0 week necessarily, but it's just they've been a team that since Real has come in and obviously didn't really work. It didn't click instantly, but now a little more gradually. He's had more reps with the team. I feel like they're only improving, and good signs from Miami in that regard.
Yeah, I forgot about the Toronto match. That's a really weird idea to have one team pull 3 matches and how they decide which team that is. And I feel like more teams would volunteer for that. Like, yeah, like let's play another match to finish out the week.
I think it's really just because of like the scheduling.
Yeah.
You know,
But
switching around the major four and how many weeks of qualifiers and whatnot. So I don't think it was intended. Maybe obviously not 100% sure there, but yeah, definitely a weird one.
And then we go to Sunday. We can kind of, LAG, they lose 3-0 again. They go on 6 this week. Losing to Miami 3-0 is that's bad, but losing to Atlanta 3-0, nothing to like really hang your head about. Although phased, like I mentioned earlier, they played sub base again, a sub base hard point, and they win 250 to 247. They had a close
one.
They had a close loss in that first series against Carolina. I mean, sub base is like the tightest hard point. Like I don't know what the average margin of victory is, but it feels like that map is like always insane. But FaZe ends up winning this 3-0. Any thoughts on this?
I mean that hard point was a wild ending. If you haven't checked it out, that's definitely one you should take a few minutes to watch. But this is just, I guess the one takeaway is we're not talking about LAG beating Atlanta online again. Like it quote unquote Atlanta gets their revenge when they really didn't need to, because they won the event after losing to LAG online and didn't lose a match for 2 months after that online loss. But I guess for maybe a mental victory for the Atlanta boys, they were able to conquer the mighty LAG online demon that thwarted their efforts a couple months back.
What a sentence that was. Toronto, they beat Miami. As we, Miami, they had their third match. They played the Ultra, so they really took a big jump in competition to go against Minnesota and then to go against LAG. And then let's finish off with Toronto, the second or third best team in the league. So not an unexpected result. Ultra win. They win the respawns, and Miami wins the search. Did you have anything on this? Obviously, Toronto kind of taking care of business as we expect them to do.
Yeah, I think this was Toronto's only match this week.
Yeah, I think it is.
So this was, I believe it was scrapped at the post game interview for this, and that's what he was kind of talking about, like the map set and whatnot a little bit, and that's what that plus like the Atlanta tweet earlier in the week, and then people talking about OpTic's map set in this following match coming up to round out the week, like that's where really it seems more apparent to me that these teams are testing out some stuff. But we've talked about Toronto's search a little bit. Since winning Major 1, how they were really strong at Major 1, obviously in Hardpoint and Search, and the Search is just kind of taking a dip since then. Obviously, when you're undefeated in a mode, it's naturally going to take a dip when you start losing. But regardless of that, it feels like that's hasn't been their strongest mode of late. So for them to lose it here, is something to keep an eye on, in my opinion. But it could be a case of them testing out some search maps and whatnot, and trying out some things against Miami, who they probably are just more willing to test out some things on. So they take care of business in the respawns, but yeah, we'll have to keep an eye on Toronto search, as I feel like I've been doing for a couple months now.
And then the match that we have all been waiting for, OpTic versus Minnesota. A battle of giants, as they would say. OpTic, who won Major 3 and disappointed last week. They lost a match. Minnesota, who, as we mentioned, lost to Miami earlier this week, and has been just pretty disappointing most of the season. Not a match that you would expect to go on last, which the CDL has been cooking the books, it feels like, because they keep doing this where they put those matches that don't make any sense to go on last, and then it turns out
haven't been able to sneak it past you. You've been on that the last 2 weeks.
It's a banger, and it's an upset. So Minnesota wins this 3-2. They beat OpTic. And now OpTic is 1-2 in the qualifiers. Minnesota, they win Game 5, Round 11, which accuracy is, he's there. So, residual Iceman. They win Round 11 in the Game 2 S&D. I don't know what the hell is going on. This is ridiculous. And obviously there are extenuating circumstances, definitely a lot of drama coming out of this regarding GAs and whether Minnesota or why Minnesota was breaking GAs and all of that stuff, and we can get into that. But just overall thoughts on this abomination of an upset for the best team of the last month or so to lose to the Minnesota Rocker.
I just gotta say, I offhandedly mentioned it at the end of last episode. I wanted to go back and listen to exactly what I said, but I just didn't before this. But I know I brought it up at the end last week when we were just saying, like, Minnesota accuracy has that tendency to, make some crazy stuff happen in the search when it matters most. Thinking back to his clutch against OpTic / was it OpTic Chicago then in Cold War? I think it was. Yeah, I think it was OpTic Chicago. But yeah, I mean, Minnesota, look, they they obviously get an important win here, and there's some drama associated with it. But end of the day, they won 4 maps this week. 3 of them were search. They went 3-0 in the search, but all 3 of them were 6-5 victories. And we've talked about the Iceman enough over the years, whether he had a direct hand in some of these 6-5 wins this go around. You can obviously discuss that, but that's literally like a round away from in either of those situations from being a totally different narrative around Minnesota. And we kind of talked about, not really sure what to make of the Minnesota team recently since the change, where they just at land, the only map they won was an S&D, but Standy has to drop a historic 17 kills in order to make it happen. So yeah, not really sure what's going on here. I don't think it's, like I said, I think if we looked up the maps and modes and records for OpTic, it's probably a case of them testing out some stuff, and that could have potentially helped open the door for the upset for Minnesota. But end of the day, Minnesota still came out and had to get the job done. And GAs are not being broken. They get the win, and leave a sour taste in some people's mouths because of that. But they get those 10 points, which, we could look back on this now a couple weeks from now and could be the difference between Minnesota being a champs or sitting at home like us.
Yeah, so Standy went on Dope Check and he was saying that they made a mistake, that I believe he said that somebody was running a smoke when they weren't supposed to, and they didn't know. Yeah, so they made a mistake in that, and that it wasn't on purpose, even though he did tell Clayster to cry some more on Twitter, which is absolutely beautiful. I love this community so much. And then the stair glitching as well. So, like, even if it was on purpose, and not saying it is, obviously he's saying it's an accident. We'll take him at his word, I guess. But let's say it's on purpose. Okay. Does it matter? Like, this is important, right? This is, do or die time. If this was like game 2 or like match 2 of the season, I'd be like, it's a little weird. Like, I'm not going to lie. That's weird that you're breaking GAs already. But like, you're getting down to like the nitty gritty. And these teams, the bottom 8, they stink. They cannot consistently win matches regardless of the circumstances. So Minnesota playing OpTic, who is a much, much better team than them, Minnesota should not win these matches. I think they should do whatever they can. They should pull out whatever they can to win these matches, because this is champs. It's supposed to be really important. And if they miss out on champs, that's a disappointment. It's a failure of a season, because there's only 12 teams. To be in the top 8 isn't a big ask, but this is a big match. And, I'm not saying that they should feel good about it or anything, but it definitely feels like this is something that more teams probably should do if they're, if it comes down to it, it's the same idea of snaking in general. If it's game 5, round 11, 1v1, you're snaking because it's important. You're going to try to win. And that, granted, he said it's not on purpose, but I'm just saying that it wouldn't surprise me if it was on purpose and they're just trying to do whatever they can to beat, the best or second best team in the entire world.
I think you're opening a floodgate there with that, but that's always been the issue with GAs in terms of policing it or trying to police what you can and can't do when it's not officially banned and stuff. Is stuff like this can happen when it's not, I'm not some expert in, coding or anything like that, but I feel like it wouldn't be the most difficult thing in the world if it's agreed upon by all the teams that you're only allowed to use one smoke and search and destroy, that the CDL could have a restriction on it in the in-game settings that just, you can only have one smoke on, and if somebody else tries to use a class that has the smoke, like,
yeah,
but if somebody else picks it first, like, you can't select that class or whatever. Like, I feel like that's not like groundbreaking technology. It's
no, it would break the game.
Probably. But, I think you're opening a can of worms there by saying that, like, you expect, because now what's stop, obviously Carolina is pretty vocal about this, and rightfully so in my eyes, and because it could directly be the difference between Minnesota getting the champs and Carolina.
They should do it.
So what's stopping Carolina from just doing the same thing next week? And we've already, dark times in COD history, but there was that one time in World War II when Clay would have been on E United, I think, and like he was in the loser bracket. He pulled out like the M1 Garand or something, which was just obvious. It was like a semi-auto gun that was obviously G8, and they beat. It was Pharaoh and Decimate's team. Was Pharaoh on the team? Pharaoh might have been on TK at that point. It was those young guys like Desi and Pharaoh. It might have been Era Eternity, something like that. I just remember there was like, and Clay like came out after. He's like, yeah, I don't know what came over me. I went out and I used it. You couldn't hide the fact that he was using that gun. That was obviously G8, and that was a long time ago now. So I don't remember the whole situation and circumstances around it. But I do know like it's happened before. So what's just in theory, what's stopping Clay from pulling up with a super broken G8 gun next week and just absolutely frying whoever Carolina plays, and then being like, he tweets at Standy after the match, cry more. Like,
nothing. Pride. Dumb pride. That's what's stopping him. I'm just saying, like, Clay didn't go to champs last year because Vegas choked down the stretch. Standy was on that team. And they should try to make champs. And I'm not saying, like, teams necessarily, like, you're a good, like, noble person if you do it, but like that's the whole point. Like, GAs are meant to be broken essentially because there's no preventative measures. It's all like after the fact, like, oh, we're not going to scrim you. Like, okay, if these teams make champs, the job is done. Like, they're not winning champs. Like, let's be real, Minnesota's not winning champs, but if they make it there, that's a big deal to them. Same with Carolina. Like, Carolina, doesn't matter how many games they win down the stretch of the season, they're not going to win champs, but making it is a big deal. It's actually like an accomplishment for those teams. I always get tired of the GA talk anyway, because it's like just pros crying about stuff about, like, oh, you're using this, whatever. Who cares? Like, just play the game. Just it doesn't. And I will say this, if that is the difference between, OpTic losing to Minnesota and beating Minnesota, then the skill gap is overestimated in this league. I thought the gap was much, much wider between potentially the best or second best team and Minnesota, who is maybe the second or third worst team in the league. Like, I think there's a bigger gap than that. I don't think that this is necessarily like, the biggest difference. Maybe I'm underestimating it, but it just feels like people have decided to complain about something that probably isn't that big of a deal, and we'll see how people react, whether Minnesota can get scrims or not, because that was supposed to be the punishment, right? It was blacklisting.
Yep.
let's see how it works. If it's gonna work, like we talked about with snaking at the beginning of the season, and some teams got blacklisted, I think, for a little bit. I don't think that really lasted. We haven't had too many complaints about snaking over the past few months, so maybe it's worked, or maybe people have just kind of gotten used to who does it and when they do it, not whatnot. So I don't know. I just wouldn't be surprised if we see a little more GA breaking in the last week or so, especially if you're right on the edge. Or who knows, Major Four, like Minnesota versus like Vegas or something, and they play in the losers bracket, all hell might break loose. Like in all honesty, like there's no guarantees that any GA, like snaking anything, could be upheld at that point.
You're painting a bad picture here, and I guess for the sake of the pod, it might be juicy if you turn out to be true here, but I hope for the sake of competitive integrity and all this stuff, heading into these qualifiers, I was excited about some of these, quote unquote bottom team matchups where, the point gap between like 5th and 11th was like 30 points or whatever heading in. I was really excited about it, and to have like any sort of aspect of it being tainted is just, you don't want that, and maybe you do, but I don't, and it is what it is now. Nothing we can change about that. But I do hope, going forward, we don't see all hell break loose like you said. But on the other hand, it would definitely make some of these online matches even more interesting. We've already seen a handful of upsets in recent weeks, so at this point, it wouldn't be the most out of this world thing to see. So we'll have to see if you're some genius who is just able to predict
that's true,
the ensuing chaos of the end of the MW3 season.
You know what should happen? Boston should just break all the GAs against FaZe not to have the longest losing streak in CDL history. They should pull out literally they should pull out riot shields for all I care.
Do you think that would actually matter though?
No, because I think like Celian would be just snaking around the map and drop like 65 in hardpoint. So, but it would be entertaining, and that's what really matters.
I guess you're right there. It could definitely, give us something to hold on to there for a matchup that probably is going to be one-sided otherwise.
Last thing I'll say is Minnesota has a precedent they set a precedent with Sound EQ. They did not agree with Boston, I think it was, in that one home series event. Or maybe, was it the other way around? Was it Boston not agreeing? I think it might have been Boston not agreeing to Minnesota's.
I know it was Boston and Minnesota. I feel like it was Boston, though, because Beans was on.
Yeah,
Boston.
So
I feel like people were accusing him.
Maybe that's just revenge. They just were like, let's get back at another CDL team, and OpTic just happened to be in the crosshairs there. But we'll see what happens with Minnesota, because they actually had the first match of this week. I'm saying it's rigged. The CDL knows what's going on. They have the script, and they've written it already. So they knew that something was going to happen in that last match of week 2. Week 3, all right, let's throw out Minnesota to start week 3 against New York, who lost in an upset. Again, and then the second match is OpTic versus Carolina. OpTic lost an upset. Carolina won their second match. I'm just saying, it's suspicious. But pick 'em. So we both went 6-4 this week. So you're 137-64. I'm 132-69. Nice. And Trimmer, 0-1. Disappointing. So we're gonna start with Friday, June 14th. Another busy week of qualifiers. Is it the last week of qualifiers, or is there
one more?
Oh God. Oh yeah, because they had like 5 weeks sometimes, and
yeah.
So yeah, it's not that bad, but I'm tired of qualifiers already. Friday, June 14th, starting with Minnesota versus New York. Who knows what we'll be seeing from the rocker? I think New York's gonna win. They usually only have like one down series, and then they get back on track. So I'm thinking they're going to bounce back here.
Yeah, I will take New York too.
OpTic versus Carolina. I feel the same way about that. OpTic probably bouncing back and coming out very motivated to win.
Yeah, I will take OpTic as well.
And then Boston versus Atlanta. This would be hilarious if Boston ended up winning this match. But I'm going to go with Atlanta FaZe.
Yeah, I think I got to agree with you. Got to go with the upset.
That's about as entertaining of the day as you could possibly get by pairing three of the best teams against three of the worst. But they've done it. Saturday, June 15th, Carolina versus Miami, which definitely has some seeding implications. I'm going to go with Carolina, but I think this could go either way very easily.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Miami. Just, obviously outside of that last match with Toronto, they, have looked a little better. This is a bit of a revenge match for Real after his visa issues earlier in the season. So give me Miami here.
LAG versus Boston.
This is the one I was mentioning earlier, where it's at least a winnable match on paper for Boston.
Yeah, it's the unstoppable object, or was it unstoppable force versus immovable object? I think they both lose in the end. I think just add another one to the loss column. I'll go with LAG. But man, that is the blow it up bowl. That should not be televised.
I can't pick Boston, so I got to go with LAG. But it's a match I don't really even want to pick, to be honest.
They should just play the stay tuned graphic for the duration of that match and then just pick back up with Seattle Vegas. The Surge versus the Legion. I'm going to go with the Surge. I think this is a really good match. Man, if Vegas loses this, though, because they really need to keep winning and just at least win one match every week. And granted, they do have a decently easy match for the second one, but they've been so up and down. I think this would be a huge win for them, but I'm going to go with the Surge.
Yeah, this is my match of the week by far. Obviously there's a showdown later on Sunday that some people might consider to be the first top four, but this one, just based on the way both these squads have been playing, the upsets Vegas have been pulling off, whether you classify some of Seattle's wins as upsets or whatever, just the way both these squads have been playing right now, really excited to see how this one shakes up. I'm going to go with Vegas, fully expecting them to break my heart again and lose to Seattle, but Vegas is winning champs, so let's go with the Legion.
And then we got Toronto and LAT. I like LAT, but not that much. So I'm going to go with Toronto.
Yeah, Toronto.
Sunday, June 16th, same thing. Toronto versus Minnesota, going with Ultra.
Yep.
Atlanta versus LAT, Atlanta. OpTic versus New York. This was the matchup that you were talking about, kind of colliding two of the top four teams. I'm going to go with OpTic. I understand why anyone would go with New York, especially with how both of these teams have played the last few weeks. They have not really been up to par. But I think OpTic in general is just a stronger team. They've shown, match in, match out that they're able to, kind of play near their top level. I have no idea what to expect of New York at any given moment. So I'll go with OpTic for that.
Yeah, I don't know why, but I just got a gut feeling here, and I'm going with New York. I really just feel like the way both of these teams have been playing recently, that this is one that it makes too much sense for me that New York somehow finds a way to win this after both of these teams lost to Vegas. Definitely a match I think OpTic should win, and maybe it comes down to what maps are sneaking through the veto process and whatnot, but I'll just go with New York for shits and gigs for this one.
I mean, Twitter's going to be really funny, I think, after that match, because when New York lost to who they lose to this week?
Vegas.
So when they lost to Vegas, OpTic fans were in like breaking point mentions talking crap about New York, like how do you lose to them, like blah blah blah. And then you lost them last week, and then they lost to Minnesota a day later. So it feels like a toxic rivalry that has really not been able to like hit the foreground. More, Atlanta Toronto has been pretty toxic this year, but like
That's an understatement.
but OpTic New York has the ability, I think, to surpass that, at least in some aspects, not in all aspects. But then the last match will be LAG versus Vegas. Um, who knows, to be honest? Like, this is definitely a match that Vegas historically would lose because they have every reason to win this. I will go with Vegas for that reason, but I am fully expecting to be disappointed.
Yeah, I'm going with Vegas, which means I'm picking Vegas to go 2-0, and I feel like every single time I've ever picked Vegas to go 2-0, they've never gone 2-0. Um, but I'm going to do it anyway. So, Vegas is winning champs. Let's go, boys.
I mean, that really doesn't have anything to do with you, probably. That's more just Vegas. Like, they kind of crap themselves. They're like, "Oh man, we're 1-0. Like, we could go 2-0, and then it completely falls apart a day later." But yeah, that about does it for the show. A little bit longer of a show, but we did talk about Black Ops 6, which is not a usual occurrence, and we probably won't get a whole lot of information for a while about the game. So, but we'll be back next week, early next week, to talk about the matches that we just gave predictions for, and then we'll give our predictions for the last week of qualifiers, which mean we're almost to Major 4, which means we're almost to Champs, which means we're almost to the end of the season, which is it's kind of gone by rather quickly. It feels like the qualifiers, they move really slowly as we're going through them, but like looking back on it, they kind of flown by, which is nice because some of these qualifiers are really boring and it's very hard to stay up to date with them. But we appreciate everybody that's been tuning in, either by listening or watching. We really appreciate it. You can always find the podcast on YouTube, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, most podcasting platforms. Please make sure to subscribe or like or follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening or watching on. Follow us on Twitter at JBink with 2Ks, at Preston Byers, and the podcast at Ego Chall Podcast. And like I said, we'll be back early next week to talk about all the matches and give our predictions for the last set of qualifiers of the CDL season, which is crazy. The last week of qualifiers coming up. But yeah, that does it for me. Bink, take it away.
Yeah, short and sweet. Thank you guys as always for the support. Almost hitting the home stretch here, but we got some more online matches to get through, and yeah, hopefully, like I said earlier, you guys enjoyed a brief little breakdown of Black Ops 6. You guys have any comments or thoughts on what you saw so far? Let us know in the comments on YouTube, and we'll be able to read off a couple of those next week if anybody has anything good to say. So, or just anything interesting to say, I guess. So, yeah, thank you guys as always for all the support. See you when we're live next week, and remember to send the chow.